What up, y'all? This is your Don Israel coming to you live from Lit, asking y'all to subscribe to the channel. So make sure y'all subscribed, make sure y'all liking the videos, make sure y'all commenting, and make sure you turn on your notifications that let you know when new videos are dropping. We're dropping them daily, and you want to be on it because we on it, all right? So keep it lit, keep it locked, subscribe, we out. Marduce is a drink. What's going on, y'all? It's your boy, your Don Israel, aka Liddy Fontaine. Pretty Liddy is what they call me. And we back again with another episode of Lit, the premier platform for all things literary, swaggy, and everything in between. Today's guest, we have one of Brooklyn's own, by way of East New York. Aja Monet is in the building. Thank you for coming, Aja. She came sick, but she still showed up, and we appreciate you for coming. She got her mint tea. She's gonna be doing her thing.
Thank you, thank you.
So, thank you for coming. One of the first things we have people do is we have them
Drink
show us
some liquor.
that. No, not that first. We do the swag first. You walk us through the swag,
What is that?
like your outfit.
Oh,
Also-
my outfit?
Yeah. So you gotta stand up.
I have
you
to
gotta
stand
yeah,
up?
you gotta walk us through the fit. So when you starting top to bottom, bottom to top.
Top.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a black shirt on,
Okay.
and I have some pants from Ghana.
Okay. Those are fly.
You know what I'm
I
saying?
like the
The
patchwork.
colors.
I like the patchwork.
colors.
Definitely swag.
And then I got some Nike Airs right here. Can y'all see it?
Yeah. I got you on the swag cam right here.
Oh, that's the swag.
Yeah. Coolin'.
And that's it.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for coming. No, I appreciate you. Even though you're sick, you're gonna do a little of the Marduce. So it's 3 parts apple juice, 1 part cognac, all parts delicious.
Okay.
Right. So
How do I begin?
you pop the top. Cheers.
I drink it all.
Mm-mm. To the leaves. That's pretty much it. And you just stir it up. Or mix it. You want to go put the top on
I don't know why I'm sniffing. I can't smell.
there.
Tastes good. Tastes good. So this is tradition.
Yeah, this is like the gin and juice of lit.
Why apple juice?
Because when you had asked off camera about like the non-alcoholic drink, like I didn't drink for a long time, and so I remember growing up and like New Year's, Martinelli's apple juice like the only thing I was allowed to drink, like the champagne thing. So that just always stuck with me. So this is good apple juice. And
It
then
is good apple juice.
my
I like that.
birthday, me and my sister, she's 6 years younger than me. We have the same birthday, and she brought Hennessy over, and I didn't drink Hennessy at the time. I ain't drink really at the time, and so she was like, "Let's mix them," and we mixed it. I'm like, "Oh, this is good," but I'm like a big Jay-Z's fan, so I'm like, I'm gonna do Douce instead of the Martin, instead of the Hennessy, and so Martin Douce is born. So Aja, give us the background of what it was like, young poet growing up in Brooklyn. Was poetry something you always knew you wanted to do, or was this something you came to fairly?
I don't know. I knew I liked writing, and I liked books. My mom, my grandmother was based in Brooklyn, East New York, so we were in and out of her house throughout my younger years, and my mom would try to always be on her own and find, an apartment somewhere else. So we kind of hopped around a lot, but we always kind of came back to my grandmother's house. So I got to see a lot of New York and experience a lot of different cultures because of that. And then my mother lied about where we lived so that I could go to a school that was like in District 2 in the Upper East Side.
Okay.
And it exposed me to a lot. And I just was around, a lot of passionate educators and people that were really advocating on my behalf that I would be or do something great.
Yeah.
So my mom always stressed education. She always stressed the importance of doing well in school. And so I always wanted to be better and understand and be good at writing and learning how to just read intently. And I remember thinking, like, I'll never understand what people are saying in these books. I was like a little kid.
Yeah.
And then when I did start to like read more and really enjoy reading, I just found it as a very profound act.
Okay. So the time you were growing up in East New York, were you traveling to the Upper East Side for school?
I was always traveling to school, no matter where I lived.
Oh, okay.
At the time.
And what school was it?
It was, well, for elementary, I went to PS 183.
Okay.
It's on 66 in New York. And for middle school, I went to East Side Middle, which was on 77th in New York or something, like around there. And then I went to high school at Baruch College Campus High School, which is in the college at the time.
Oh, okay. So 23rd and like...
23rd Lexington. It's now relocated to, like, they have their own building, but at the time we were in the college.
Yeah. And so, like, when you're navigating this, you was traveling this whole time by yourself, or were you being, like, your mom's was taking you uptown to the school?
There was a time where I was staying with my grandmother, and my mom couldn't bring me to school, so my grandmother was bringing me. And then my grandma started getting kind of, like, it was too much for her, because I had to wake up and travel, to the point where she was like, you're old enough to learn how to get on the train. And I was all of like 9 or 10 years old.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was like, oh my God, I'm terrified. She did it with me a few times and tried to show me. And then I started taking the train on my own around like 10.
Yeah.
And I remember being like so scared that I got on the wrong train. Because I had to take the J train from Cleveland all the way to Brooklyn Bridge, or was Delancey or something.
Yeah.
And then I still remember going to the 6 train and wondering if I was getting on the right side.
Oh, yeah.
But the 6 train, there's no wrong way to go because Brooklyn Bridge is the last stop.
Yeah.
So it's whatever train you take from there.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting on the train like, I don't want to have to ask anybody, because then if I ask people, then they know that I'm like not a train rider. And then like, it's scary being a kid on the train. So I ended up learning and finding my way, and then from then on I was always on the train by myself.
That's interesting. I mean, I remember growing up, and I used to live in East New York. I used to live between East New York and then Bed-Stuy, so I would take the C train from Ralph to Broadway Junction. No, C train from Ralph to Liberty. And I remember like the same sort of thing of like navigating the trains. I was like, 6, 7 years old, taking the trains to and fro. And that's something I definitely don't see as much on the trains anymore. It's like little kids just sort of taking the train by themselves anymore. So like that culture of like, my sister doesn't even like let my nephew, he's 16 years old, she's still like, I don't want to leave him.
It's so dangerous too, because you gotta let kids go off in the world and learn. But I get it, the world's a scary place. New York is, I think, safer now than it was then.
Yeah.
So I almost feel like it's a better place to try to go.
Navigate. So for you, in terms of navigation, who was one of the first writers, or some of the first writings that like kind of helped you navigate this world and kind of like ushered in for you, like being a writer, being a poet was like a real thing?
I don't think it was any one writer.
Mm-hmm.
I think I kind of was just intrigued by different writers. I remember in school, when I started reading, I was reading like the Judy Blume books.
Oh yeah.
And I felt like a big girl when I started reading, like, not just Judy Blume. I read like she had a autobiography or something.
Okay.
My Own 2 Feet or something like that. And I remember thinking like, I'm a real reader now. And then like reading Go Ask Alice and all these crazy, and then Diary of Anne Frank, all these like, the young adult books that you start reading.
Yeah.
And so when I started to really become aware of what writers are doing in poetry and why I wanted to do it, I, of course, loved Maya Angelou, and I loved, some of the first writers that I remember were Langston Hughes and, like, the people that you were taught.
Yeah.
I think that when I started to kind of figure out what I wanted to read on my own and, like, seek out reading different things that my teachers weren't teaching me, was when I felt like a real writer, or, I was trying to find my own voice and figure out what was not being taught to us. So reading Jean Toomer was like a big thing for me.
Damn. And how old were you when you found Gene? Because that man just came into my life by way of an older artist, like 2 years ago.
I think I was around, I want to say, maybe like the last year of middle school to like high school. First year of high school. It was my mom's cousin that introduced me to Gene Toomer. She gave me her copy.
Kane?
And I carried that with me a lot. I don't know who else. I think there's so many different, of course, like the Sodi Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni.
So your family, like, the people in your family, like, they were, like, coming from, like, well-read backgrounds?
No, my mom, no. Like, my mom read pretty regular books that, you know, she wasn't really well-read. But it was when I got exposed to my mom's side of the family, she was reconnecting with, like, family members that we hadn't really been in touch with a lot of my younger years, and like as my mom started to reconnect with them, there was a part of the family that was a lot more like, they grew up a lot more educated or with a lot more resources, I feel.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was my mom's cousins and stuff, and they, when I would go stay with them, they would talk to me about books or things I was studying and like things that I would do in school. Whereas my mom, she was just like, do your work.
Yeah.
She didn't sit there and go over things with me and be like, this is how you do this, this is how you do this. It's like I had to learn on my own, and if I didn't know, there was no one home who was going to really help me.
Right.
So, you know, there was the balance of then learning about my other family, and they were a little bit more literate. They were the ones that like would share books with me or talk to me about certain books and take me to the bookstore to buy books. So yeah, I think that it's been a journey of trying to, you know, just trying to find my own voice when I was growing up.
So was poetry the first sort of, not to say genre, but the first sort of practice that you started seeking your voice in, or was it through other forms? Like, were you writing like fiction or like, you know, essays or anything like that? Or?
Mostly poetry. I hated essay writing.
Why?
It was just too much. Too many rules. I'm a rebel. I don't like a lot of rules.
Figured. That's fair.
I don't like authority often. I mean, granted, I love, you know, learning things. I love being exposed to things. But when, you know, you're growing up and you're taught that everything you do is your instincts are wrong, and no one teaches you where your instincts come from or why they are that way, you start to feel dumb, or you start to feel like you're not doing things the right way, and then you find out, wait, there's other genres, there's other ways of like writing and creating, and that there's a breadth of knowledge out there that we aren't taught, especially not in our, you know, in like elementary school years, middle school years, even up until high school. I don't think you're really exposed to many forms until you get to college or something.
So, and was that true for you? Like, is that when you started? When does poetry enter your life?
High school. High school was when poetry entered my life, but I was the kind of person that you still had to do essays and stuff. But I was the kind of person where I was like, well, I write poetry, so can I write a poem in response versus an essay? You know? And some of my teachers were really like open to it, because I think I went to a progressive school, quote unquote, and the teachers were all young, just got out of their colleges, institutions or whatever, and they're teaching. So they're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and really excited, and I think they're not jaded by the education system yet. So I feel like they were close enough to us in age where they were encouraging of experimentation.
Okay. And so with the poetry, I remember like you were at the Brooklyn Book Festival, and there was a stream of conversation where it got into the whole idea of the distinction between spoken word and poetry, and it was obviously like this riff, and there's obviously still a riff where people think that spoken word poets aren't real poets versus like poetry as written on the page is real poetry. Was that something you had felt when you first started writing poetry, like the distinction, or was it just like all poetry to you?
I never felt the distinction until I realized that, you know, the literary world, until I went to college.
Where'd
But
you
for
go for
me,
college? I'm sorry.
I went to Sarah Lawrence for undergrad, and then I went to School of the Art Institute of Chicago. School of the Art Institute of Chicago in grad school for my MFA. And essentially, like, my teachers were encouraging. Like, they would come to my poetry readings. They would, like, you know, I used a poem for our talent show, and I won with a poem. And there was never really a distinction between reciting and writing it. Like, for me in high school, not really. Then I started doing, like, youth poetry performances and slams and stuff like that. And I realized that that was a whole world. But, like, even in that world, there was workshops, and there were people we sat with written poems. We didn't sit there and just, like, you didn't have a workshop where you just spoke your poem and then people would critique your speaking. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, they went over your poem, and it was always about the poem. Right. And then you would get better eventually based off of how much you were reading at reading poetry. It wasn't like a class that was like, we're going to help you recite your poems. It wasn't until I got to slam and slamming with youth poetry that, like, you had more guidance on how to read your poetry, because slam is really about how you engage the audience and how you convey your poem. But it was always started with the poem and the page, you know? And then I got to college and I took a class with Jeffrey McDaniel, which was funny about the guys that mentioned him at the Brooklyn Book Festival. And I remember me going to because in Sarah Lawrence, you're able to interview your professors before you take them. Oh, so cool. I remember going to interview for this class, and, like, everybody kept saying, Michael Sorelli, who's from Urban Word NYC, the org that I came up under, was like, you should look out for Jeffrey McDaniel. He teaches there. Yeah. You should take a class with him. So I went to do an interview with him, was really excited to try to get a class with him. And I left really disappointed because the first thing he said to me was like, you know, this isn't a slam poetry class. Like, this isn't a spoken word class. And I remember thinking, like, what? Like, you know, like, why you, like, that's so random.
Like, just to come out the gate.
Yeah, because I guess he knew that I came from that world, and, like, he wanted to make a distinction that this class wasn't one of those classes. Yeah. And I felt really just put off, and we had a conversation about it after, which was the irony of the whole thing, is that Jeffrey McDaniel's known as being, like, one of the premier slam poets from a certain time period. Like, he was killing the slam scene and the poetry community scene. So the irony of it all is, like, here's this poet who's, like, known as a very, you know, successful spoken word slam poet. Right. And now is more in the literary world and teaching. But he had his own judgments of what he thought I was coming to that class for. And granted, like, time has passed and we're cool and there was never any issue with it. But I think that was the first moment that I realized, oh, like, people really feel some type of way about performance.
Do you think it was something he himself felt, or you feel like he internalized that opinion and felt like because he was the guy, like, sort of like, you know, black people who, like, because they're black, they feel like they have to go harder on black people. Do you feel like it was like, because I'm known for slam poetry, I have to be that much harder on slam poets? Do you feel like it was like one of those things, or do you feel
I'm sure I don't even know what it was. Okay. All I know, I didn't spend too much time trying to figure out what he was going through.
Fair enough.
I just didn't apply and for his class, and then I think he realized that I did it, and it was like, met up with me and we had lunch, and he was like, I noticed you didn't apply for the class, and I was like, yeah, because, like, this didn't feel like it was welcoming, you know. And we had discussion. I ended up taking a class with him eventually. And I think in that class I grew, and I hope he grew as a teacher too. Right. Because I think that we perpetuate some of these problems that we say is the establishment, quote unquote, but we become the establishment when we start to assert these ideas, you know? Yeah. And so I think my whole distinction between that conversation at Brooklyn Book Festival was like, it's a lack of education. Yeah. It's a real lack of education. These people who seem so educated, seem to know all these literary poets, like, don't know what poets have been doing for forever. Like, right. The performance poetry world was a world of writers and authors, and they had books. In the New Eureka Poets Cafe, when you used to win Grand Slam, you got a book published. You know, like, so there was no distinction between the literary.
That was a part of the culture.
It was, and I think it was other, you know, the white patriarchal literary world, whatever, that was their own conflict about it, because they saw these poets who could come up there and not just write well, but also spit a poem and it bring chills to your arms. And I think that takes a skill set that, you know, they weren't studying or encouraging studying in the school.
Yeah. So, on the subject of your book, My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter, Angela Davis, Terrence Hayes, Harry Belafonte, Carrie Mae Weems. This is one of the most diverse group of blurbs and cosigns that you've gotten. And I think it speaks to a lot of what the book is about, how it navigates the personal, the political, poetic, and like the art. And so, what was the origins of this book? Like, how did this book start in your mind?
It was a collection of poems that I have been holding on to and hadn't published anywhere, and felt really kind of not encouraged by the literary space to submit poems. And, you know, there's only but so many times you submit a poem and you don't get accepted that you're just like, I'm done.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and not even on some like, I'm done as in I don't want to keep working, and I'm like not gonna still better myself as an author and a poet and writer, etc.
Yeah.
But it's like, why am I so caught up in like getting you to approve this when I've been able to create a career for myself outside of those spaces?
Yeah.
And so like, getting your approval doesn't really matter. What matters is if I find value in what I'm sharing. And so I had these poems, some of these poems I've been reciting or sharing for years, and it's just never been in a publication. It's never been written anywhere.
Yeah.
I've never been invited to submit things to certain publications until very recently.
Right.
So for me, it was like, I need to put out a book. I'm intimidated by what putting out a book means, because there's oftentimes this very, you know, this way that books are put together.
Right.
You have to have this really clear arc, and like they're usually a quarter of maybe of the pages that I have. And but then I started to look at older poets and some of my elders and the people that I was inspired by, and you think about the women of color, Audre Lorde, and you know all these people that Jane Cortez, Carolyn Rogers, like these women that were very specific about creating their own outlets for themselves to be published, and like decided for themselves what their books would look like.
Right.
So for me, I was like, wait, like why wait to get them all published in some publication for them to be bound to be in a book? I'm just gonna put a book together.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna find somewhere that's gonna help me do it. And Haymarket at the time had asked me to do stuff with. They asked me to look over Angela Davis' book or something, and I had known of Haymarket and the work that they were doing.
They just asked you to look over Angela Davis' book. They was like.
Yeah, they sent me because I've been doing community work and activism work, quote unquote, for some time, and I had, you know, there were certain people on Haymarket that knew of the work I was doing, or knew of some of the things we did in Palestine and some of the things we were doing in the community, and I think that they somehow reached out. You know, I forget, someone sent me an email like, oh, there's this book coming out, we would love for you to take a look at it. And then I realized, I was like, oh, well, you know, I'm trying to put a book together.
Yeah.
Do you guys even, you know, put books, like, would you put a poetry book together?
Yeah.
And I realized there was like only 2 other poets that were on their roster.
Yeah.
And they were both men.
Okay.
Or 3. It was Kevin Colville, Roger Bonnet-Hagard, and Remy.
Okay.
Remy Kanazi.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, well, for sure they have to have a woman poet on their roster. Like, you know, women of color poets have always been defining what activism looks like, and how do we show up, and how do we reimagine ourselves, and, you know, anyway, I told them that I wanted to try to find somewhere to put the book, and they were like, well, send us the manuscript, we'll look at it.
Yeah.
And it went through iterations of like, should I keep these many poems in it, should I not, like, what's going to be the thorough line, like, what's going to be the thing that gets people to really attach to it. And then for me, it has so much range. There's so many things that the book touches on. So I tried to find my own way of segmenting it as I have been developing as a writer, a poet in my career.
Yeah, and was to me like one of the lines that stuck with me is the line where you say, "I wish you more freedom and less fighting." and that resonated a lot because I think a lot of what is evident in a lot of the poems is like how much fight has to exist, especially women of color, to even exist in these small ways. And so that makes itself pronounced throughout the book. But then another thing, and you brought it up about like the way in which you sort of draw that line and that connection of like what's going on in Palestine to what's going on with people of color here in America. And when you started going to Palestine, was that something that was immediately you recognized, or did you have to kind of sort of orient yourself to like the political landscape before it kind of resonated that way?
Well, I was politicized through poetry. So
Okay.
my first understanding of Palestine was from a poet by the name of Tahani Salah, who's a Brooklyn native.
Okay.
And she's Palestinian, and she was always bringing up Palestine and elevating the narrative. And then there was Suhair Hamad, and as well June Jordan.
Yeah.
And these were all women who, to me, were using their poetry to, talk about their personal lives and their experiences, but also to address how the personal was political. And June Jordan particularly, she was always just questioning herself and questioning society and trying to create, to empower herself through her language and to create more space and courage through her poems. So for me, it was just a trajectory. I was a part of a long list of other women who had recognized the importance of not just the Palestinian struggle for liberation, but the international struggle for liberation.
Yeah.
The struggles that go on in the Congo, the struggles that are going on in the Caribbean, and things that happened in Cuba, and things that are happening in South America and Venezuela, and like there's so many places that I think poets have a different imagination and also a different understanding of the landscape of the world. And I don't think being a poet makes you any more tied to a nation state than another,
Right.
So I feel like in that I started to find my own voice about, I was traveling a lot long before Palestine, so I recognized that it wasn't until I left that I could have some sort of real grounded perspective on America and what the state of America was and how fucked up it really is.
Yeah.
Because there are alternative ways of being in other cultures and societies and governments, etc.
Right.
And we are made to believe that this is the only way to do things.
Yeah.
So I think my question for the book often is, as I travel as a woman of color, I meet and I am engaging with different women and their own struggles to find and to create and to be who they want to be in the world that they are living in. And that comes with its own hardships.
I think it was the poem Dark Matter, where you're like, are we anything more than basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but the thing of like, are we anything more than our like lives being lost? Like, are we beyond that? Like, do we imagine our lives? Is there a way to talk about our bodies besides when they're being taken from us? And that like also resonated because I know for a long time, like I had to actually stop writing about like Black trauma. You got to come back in the frame.
Sorry.
All right. No, but because I was,
I said I'm starting to believe this is all we value is each other's death more than life.
Yeah.
And if life's so valuable, how come? How so? It's not lost to me that death is part of life. Some die so others live, but who's doing all the dying exactly at the expense of all this living?
Yes. And I remember like reading, even writing when I started, like the first essay I ever got published was this essay that was about my role in, like I was going to Columbia at a time when like Bed-Stuy was, when I first noticed that Bed-Stuy was being gentrified. And I was trying to like create this understanding of like, I'm going to like get better and be successful, but I'm coming home and the place I'm being taught to leave is the place it's becoming a very place that like I would want to stay at. And like the editor of that particular essay was like, oh, Trayvon Martin happened, put that in there. And I was like, it didn't, it was weird to me, but at this time I was like, I want to be published. So like I like figured out a way to finesse it into the narrative, but it was just like a lot of my writing from that point had started to become this sort of performative act of like tracing trauma that wasn't necessarily mine. And it wasn't until like I got to a place where I was like, yo, like why do I always have to write about traumatic things? And a lot of it had to do with like having white editors, for example. And when I got to like the MFA program at the New School, I was watching how essays were being turned into ethnographies. And when I wrote an essay about like being in high school, like just everyday shit about what it means to be in high school, and that essay didn't go over well, but I would read it for people in my neighborhood, or like at like, you know, open mics where there was a lot of black and brown people. These were the same messages that people were like, yo, I like that. And I was watching how like the absence of a certain narrative that people expected started to like change like the response to my work. And then essays weren't so easily getting placed and published because it wasn't doing that thing of what you say here, which is like always talking about loss in this way that's like, in a weird way that like empowers the narrative that our bodies don't have power.
Yeah, well, in this poem, in Dark Matter, I think I'm addressing something altogether larger than that, which is that we are, you know, we're taught that, I address a few things, one of which is like capitalism and how capitalism shapes the society and the banks and gold and who holds the gold and who possesses the gold and how we base our knowledge on 5 Western countries and why, and then that in this current moment where Black Lives Matter is elevating as a movement, you know, there's scientists trying to figure out what dark matter is and talking about the God particle, and so there was like these really different relationships or correlations that I was making to what I saw happening in the world at this time, and it wasn't just us isolated in this one moment, but that it was part of a larger history. And for the most part, America's a very young country, so we don't realize how much and how little we know of the world and other cultures and other countries that have had longer trajectories, you know, longer time to make mistakes and to look back and say, we did this wrong, we didn't do this right, this is how we got to look forward, what we will do and how we define ourselves as a country, a culture, a society. And there's nothing like America before. There's, you know, in the sense of how many different cultures and how many different people and faiths and where it is and what it's done, and the, you know, it's a part of the world history, and so we have to think about America as a in a global context, and I don't think we do. And Black Americans often find themselves in the, you know, we think about ourselves from the Black American experience, and we don't think often of ourselves as a part of the diaspora and a part of a larger narrative of the struggle of Black and brown people over this time. So for me, you know, when I write, especially about pain or trauma, it's not a performance for me. It's something that I actually really feel. And so, you know, there's this, there's moments where I write and I have to be compelled to, like I have to have, either I have the feeling and it's there or it's not. And there's moments when people have asked me to do things and I don't do it. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know how to show up in that moment with the words, because I might still be going through it. So for example, when Ferguson happened and, you know, we were trying to figure out something for Michael Brown. You know, Michael Brown was his name, and what was happening at the time was not just a national case, it was an international case. And I remember being reached out by Prince's team, of all people, to write a poem for Michael Brown. That's something I've never really shared, but I remember I didn't have the words for him. You know, like, and I was like, this is Prince. Like, this is someone you gotta,
if
like...
you want to show up, this is when you...
And I always felt bad that I didn't have the words at the time because of the pressure I felt from this person that I respected, that I thought that needed this thing. But it took me my own time in order to process my feelings of that moment and where I wanted to go. So I say this to say, like, of course, Black people's pain and trauma is always used in different ways. But we have to be sure of where we feel deeply and how we feel about something, and then also tell the stories we want to tell. Not tell stories that people want us to tell, but tell the stories we want to tell. And also check people that are exploiting our stories, because that's why I say I'm always I'll end here, but I'm always very cautious, or at least curious about what white people and what this white literary establishment rewards and lifts up and elevates.
Yeah.
Because it always makes me wonder, well, what is it about this work that they are listening to, or they want to be elevated in this moment, in the grand scheme of the moment?
Yeah.
What is the literary, American literary landscape trying to tell, or what story is it trying to show about Black and brown people?
Yeah.
Based off of what things it elevates.
Right.
And for me, I've never been concerned with being elevated by the white literary spaces as much as I am concerned with being elevated by my people. Right. And that means women of color, that means Black people, that means brown people, that means people that know what it's like to struggle and live and experience and grow, etc.
Yeah.
So those are the people I'm hoping to reach.
Yeah. And
hopefully I also am reaching myself. Like I'm trying to talk to myself, not the rest of the world.
That's real shit too. That's real shit. And now for me asking you, was that thing of reaching yourself, was that something you knew at the beginning? Was that something the more you've written and the more work you've done, the more you start to see that that's what you want to do? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very selfish act to write and create. To be an artist.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, you might do it with some purpose of hoping to affect and reach other people. But I think at the end of the day, you have to have some commitment to yourself because it takes discipline and it takes some kind of level of focus. And so writing a poem, I have to be able to shut everything else out in my world to focus on that one specific moment that I'm going to be writing about.
Yeah.
And that is a way of me dealing with myself and processing myself. And often I'm a mess in life if I feel like I can't communicate what I really feel. And maybe it's not to the world or to other people, but if I can't get my thoughts out the way I want them to, then I start to go through like real self-deprecating type behavior, and I'm not like the best person. So writing, as much as it is something where it's like I'm writing with the audience of my people in mind, I'm also writing with me in mind.
Yeah.
You know, always.
Yeah. So have you read something, but I would like to request if you could read the poem about Obama.
Oh, the poem about Obama.
That's one of my favorite poems because it like what poetry always does is it covers a lot of ground with very few words, like a very economizing thing. And I think those line breaks is where you really feel, or where I really felt the power.
Yeah. I hope so. I never know how people take things. So, some people love this poem. Some people probably like, what the hell? So I'm always encouraged. Poems create a new meaning for me when they do something for you that I didn't see, Yeah. But this poem is called "It Is What It Was." It is what it was. When your president bails out the banks, not the students, it don't make no difference if he's black or blue. All you care about is how much money you got before you overdraft your account for reading books and writing essays, and all you got to show for it is garnished checks, cups of noodles, fancy friends, and terms your family don't understand. They just want to know why you got 2 degrees and no health care and no decent income. I tell them I got all the ways to talk about the problem, but no way to make solutions. So dear Mr. Crazy Foreign Policies, False Flags, War, and Propaganda, Mr. GMOs, Chemtrails, Drones, and Deportations, dear Mr. False Hopes and Bamboozled Dreams, Mr. Osama Bin Laden and Gaddafi Killer, Mr. No Power to Close Get Mobile chastising black folk to defend your white cousins, we know Trayvon could have been your son. Sad thing is, he was you too.
That's that shit. That was that shit. I remember I read that and I felt that. I was like, woo!
Yeah.
I had to post that on the gram and I was like, underlined. I was like, this shit is fuego. Like that shit was.
What does it make you feel?
This shit, man, you know what it made me feel? Because I feel like when you just come like further anxiety because I know you like to. What's his name?
I don't want to like get you sick too. That's
No. We good. What it made me feel when I read it was it confirmed for me a lot of the feelings I had but was afraid to say because I didn't have the language to say it in. And I'm somebody who like I've seen what happens when language that's not necessarily tweaked to the top, at least in the intentions of what I mean to say, it goes wrong. Like, and then you spend more time trying to reel the shit back than it is explaining it. So I just sat on it. And I'm like, so when I read that poem, it was like yes, and I think that the poem was able to do something that like sometimes, like you said, an essay does too much. So sometimes because there's not enough space being taken up, like at least for me, I find myself trying to figure out like how do I like fill in those gaps. But I think that what the poem did was like it allowed those gaps to linger, right? And so it lets that feeling of like, to me, like the response to whatever could be said was like, I'll let you say that, but I'm still gonna say what I said.
Yeah.
And that's how the poem hit me. Like it was a punch in the chest, and it was just one of those things where I think we're like, and I'm not gonna say we, I'm gonna say like for me, like watching what happened with the whole narrative of what he did, and even now, like there's still romanticizing of his presidency and like, oh, we want him back and things like that, as opposed to like the empire in which we are a part of is corrupt. So it's like there's nothing good that can come of a corrupt empire, even if you get like a president who like gives a good face for it, but the empire is what it is.
Yeah, I think we all want a hero, and we all want leaders, and that's the hard part. Is like, you have hopes and you have aspirations for people, but there's a world we live in, and that comes with conditions and experiences and things compromises that people make. So I feel like, Obama is a reflection of what Black people were hoping for. We put all our hopes, our dreams, our aspirations in him.
Yeah.
And granted, people disappoint you in life.
Right.
But I think what's at stake is, I think that someone that seems to be as educated as him must know what he's engaging in. It's one thing to like do things and be stupid, like Trump.
You think he's stupid?
Who, Trump?
Yeah.
I think that.
Because
I think that he's smart, and I think that he's dumb. I think that there's things that people could be both.
Absolutely.
I think people can be both. Now, I don't think he's smart because I think that what I would see to be a smart person would be someone that's actually bringing the country together and actually doing profound things. You know what I mean? Like to elevate and evolve us. Smart as in acknowledging that climate change exists and that we need to be doing things to take care of. Smart as in Puerto Rico right now is gonna face 6 to 8 months without possibly power.
And the thing he says is like, oh, y'all in debt right now.
And where is he and what is he doing? Right. I mean, there are real realities that there's nuance to Obama's presidency, and there's things and demonstrations, and he was very representational for us. So I think that, seeing the representation of him gave us a lot of calm and peace, and like brought us to a place of feeling like we really were going somewhere. We're really changing things. We're really going to be where we need to be.
Yeah.
And now Trump is just getting so much permission to bring the country back into this narrative of what he claims is making America great again. But we know that America's never been great. So I think for me, in this specific poem, I wanted to try to address my anger and frustration with Obama, especially around the Trayvon Martin situation, because there were so many moments I wanted him to speak up, just to say something, to and at some point I just say, well, it's not for you. Then if you're not going to say it, I'm not going to be spending the rest of my life waiting for you to say something and sad and moping because you didn't say it. I'm just going to say it myself, and I'm going to say how fucked up it was that you didn't say it, because that wasn't like Black people were asking you to start a damn Black Liberation Army. You know what I mean? Like, people weren't like, go start your own nation state and tell white people they all need to die. No, people were just saying, like, can you show us that you hear us, that you love us, that you're fighting for us,
and also that you love you. And which is what the poem is
Exactly.
actually saying is not, and that's what I did love about the poem was the last line was like that whole idea of representation is like, you know, yeah, it's easy for you to represent us, but like, are you even representing you right now?
Yeah.
With what you're not saying.
Yeah, and if he said he could have been my son, as if he wasn't, and that to me was like also like really
like
interesting,
a very distancing act. Like,
because if it was your son, you damn sure know that you would have been, you know, it would have been impossible to contain,
right,
and be so poised about it, and not want justice served, and not want people to really address how justice needed to be served. And Obama said something recently about the protest with Colin Kaepernick and all of them about, oh, I want people to just listen to each other, and how, you know, the people that are protesting need to listen to the people who have family and who served and things that they've done. And then he's like, and then the people that are like, you know, on the other side, people need
it's all sides.
It was his language. It's the way he uses language, because he's such a master manipulator of language.
He'd be finessing.
And he said something like, and we need to listen to the people who have, you know, who are outraged by police brutality. And he said, and who think that basically these people were wrongfully killed or whatever, you know, by the police. As if it's a thought, as if it wasn't on tape, as if it's like, you know, as if we think that this is a problem. So, you know, don't get me into politics. It's just too crazy. And, you know, literary world is political in itself. So when people try to step away from that, it's really interesting too, because I don't want to be rewarded by the system if it's wrong. You know, that's not what I'm looking for. I want, if I'm going to be, if people are going to read this book and look at my work and my life, I hope that I pushed folks to do radical things and to tell radical stories and, you know, to want to change things.
Absolutely. Well, I could tell you this poetry book is continuing to push the change in me. And I'm saying that in the sense that a lot of my writing, before I read this book by Hilton Ellis called The Women, had no women in it. Like, so like my mom's was there, but she wasn't really there. Like I wasn't really investigating what her interior life looked like. Like none of the women in my essays had interior life. But then I read that book, and he was talking about basically not knowing who his mother was to the day she died. And to me, I took that as like the, oh shit, like I better figure out who these women are in my life before they're gone. And I'm sitting there looking at people like, yo, who was this person really? And so I remember there's a line in one of the poems where you talk about the men who like never grew up, who were like hitting on younger girls. I don't know how, like the way you phrased it is
limbo.
Yeah.
Limbo.
Glad you know it.
I don't know all the pages yet, but I do know that poem.
But I just remember like that just resonated with me, because it's like, you know, I have a little sister right now who lives, she goes to Howard, and she moved out there, and she's realizing, or she's hearing how dangerous it is for like black girls in DC going to Howard, because like the men, like how many men are killing like the girls out there for like not talking to them and shit like that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, here we go, right here, limbo. I used to walk to the train station, school mornings. Here, there is no such thing as sexual harassment, just old men that never grow up. Little girls grow into women and know the difference between a catcall and love is the kind of attention it gives you. And I was just like, I had never, when I had wrote about the dangers of growing up in Bed-Stuy, you know, you're going to see a girl who live in like Tompkins projects, and you worried about your body. But I was never like, what's the danger that visits her body? Because it was just always in my mythology that it was like, oh, it's just so dangerous to be a black dude, which it is. But when I'm only talking about that danger, I'm not fathoming other dangers for other people.
Yeah.
I was doing myself a disservice. So when I read into that, like this just felt like Brooklyn to me. And I'm not saying it only happens in Brooklyn, but I remember like, you know, the little girls going to the corner store and like the old dudes on the corner like, hey, mommy, come in. And I'm not thinking nothing about that. I'm like, I hope they don't.
Because it becomes normalized.
Yeah.
And then you like, you know, you hear the stories of girls that like snap back at a dude and like shoots her, you know, or tries to slap her in the face. And you wonder, what is the male ego is pretty fragile.
Yeah. That
it feels so threatened by a woman being like, leave me the hell alone. Like,
but and I wasn't even taught those things. Like, I won't say I wasn't taught those things, but there wasn't like a practice of that, of like what does the other frame of reference look like? So I'm growing up in a matriarchal household, like my mother, my older sister, and things like that. And a lot of times when women get into things, it's usually like even the women around me were like, well, what did she do? It's never like, why did he do that? It's like, what did she do? So I internalize it. I'm not blaming nobody. I'm just like, what I've like learned to internalize is like, oh, so she got smacked? What she say to do? As opposed to like, why I do smacking her? And it was like the change of the question, I think, has changed the way I see things.
Yeah.
So a lot of what you answer were the questions I have learned to ask. So I look for that in writing now. And it was like all throughout these poems was like those sort of answers. I'm like, okay, like what that feels
like.
Well,
I appreciate you for reading it and listening to those poems, because I think it does take courage for people to read or listen to experiences that don't have anything to do with their own personal life and like story, and to try to understand or learn or have compassion.
Yeah.
It's a step in the right direction for all of us to be doing that for each other.
Word, most deaf. So give us another poem before you get out of here. We're gonna get you back to your bed.
What poems?
Laid up. Give me, Can
you tell me a poem to read? Seriously, I don't know what to
We in Brooklyn. Let's do Brooklyn. Let's do the Brooklyn poem. Give my regards to Brooklyn.
Okay.
Is that it? Okay, cool.
Give my regards to Brooklyn. On the humble, I be having these dreams where I'm people watching with Basquiat sitting on a curb on Bedford Ave, sipping piraguas, talking about never thought I'd live to see the day. Could have sworn I saw Otis Blackwell walking out the corner store on Atlantic Ave, smoking a Lucy, whistling a new tune for Elvis to cover. And it was gully right, because I caught Biggie on a stupid bed-stuy selling dope to a hipster with Ready to Die tatted across the pale of his arm. Hadn't seen a hoopty in a while when old dirty bastard pulled up, offered me a ride to the pink houses, and suddenly a handsome mocha man sitting on a nearby fire escape calls my name. I could tell it was Jackie by the Dodgers stitched across his chest. He told me I miss home, and then it all fades to black. When I woke, the blue moon was sprawling out of its hiding place, limbs hanging over the shoulder of night after lovers had abandoned their bodies, laughing in the corners of each other. I was a full-tin lamppost staring at the sky's cheekbone shy of stardust through the blinds of J-Train tracks. This is how it feels to dream of being moonlight in East New York. A concrete plant collecting whispers of bodega blues. Darling sunrise tickles drumbeat hips swaying through the air of South Zone. And I envy the morning swag. Boomboxes hold our windows open in July. We face our fears on the cyclone called romance. A stroll along the boardwalk in Coney Island. Head nods pay respect on beat. Boys playing Scully in the street. We used to buy our kicks from City Line and roll a blunt for our fallen soldiers and spark a generation in love with spray cans and naked tenement buildings. Graffiti the spirits of hustlers with bubble letters. Mr. Softy Summers meant stealing Abuela Santa offerings for Tweety Bird on a popsicle stick, playing hopscotch on the broken sidewalk, eavesdropping on front stoop gossip, hair braiding, fingers dancing between strands of air. Brothers get caught in gangs, get caught in barbershops, get caught on street corners, get caught. Thrown against the hood of cop cars, seen one too many handcuffs on the wrists of brown and black skin. We dock slave ships on our shores daily. Know Rikers Island like a country home. I'm convinced my father conceived me in Kings County arraignments while daydreaming of freedom. I owe my life to the woman who stopped my mother on the B-56 on her way to the abortion clinic and told her, "You have a poet coming."
Super fly, super lit. Yo, D, grab me my bag, bruh. This is also a part of the show. It's usually over here, but just pass it to me on the back end.
Out the frame.
You can do it. But I appreciate everybody that pull up to the shizzo.
Does this mean I get a gift?
Yeah, you get a gift. Of course you get a gift. This is for you.
Yes. I love presents.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's this way.
Yeah. It's the lit pen coming on the show for being lit, and then your name is on the bottom half so that's yours. The market got a little fucked up.
Thank you.
Excuse the thing.
Look at that, Cal.
Got the boom. Yeah.
So it went down.
You got some events coming up. You want to tell people you're gonna be at? I know you got a tour.
Yeah, I'll be touring. I don't know when this will air though. I don't think it'll air in time for some of the things.
Nah, yeah, we're gonna drop this next Monday. Is that?
Oh, well, I have something tonight, so
okay.
that's the Freedom Forum. But October, I'll be upstate New York.
Mm.
I'll be doing some stuff in DC,
Yeah.
and I'll be in Europe.
Ooh. Okay.
Ooh, and then November, I'll be on the West Coast a bit.
Okay.
So, I don't know when I'll be back in New York, maybe December or something,
Alright.
but yeah.
Cool. And then where can people follow you? On the gram, on the
Instagram is just at Aja Monet, AJAMONET. Twitter, it's Aja_Monet, because some other girl has my Aja Monet.
You tried to buy it from back from. You know that's a hustle now.
I didn't know that you could
people
do
buy
that.
handles. People make like they'll take the handle and then sell it back to the person who they know is gonna buy it. That's a legit hustle now.
I wish. She's a gymnast.
Oh, okay, well.
She's doing the damn thing. I think she might be like the next like medal winner or something.
Oh shit.
She's killing it.
You get confused with her? Do people like hit you?
No, I think she gets confused for me more.
Hey.
I mean, but one day it's gonna turn. The script is gonna flip because she's really doing dope shit.
Right.
Look up Aja Monet, the gymnast. She's killing the game.
All right.
Yeah. And then
yeah.
my website's ajamonet.com.
And then the last thing is your literary swag, and this is like your 3 favorite writers and your 3 favorite clothing designers.
Oh my god. I hate when they do this. That means I gotta pick out of all the people I love.
Go dead. Pick dead people.
There's a lot of dead people, you know.
Goddamn. Well, I mean, if you pick dead people, you don't gotta worry about setting no alive people.
Well, Jane Cortez, June Jordan, Carolyn Rogers,
Okay.
and Mary Evans, just for good loving.
Okay, boo. And then the swag. What's the swag like?
I don't even know clothing designers.
Okay. Where do you like to shop? What's it?
Thrifting.
Okay, that's one.
I love thrift stores. Go to your local thrift store.
All right.
Goodwill.
Here we go.
And support your local farmers market and flea market.
Boom. All local, all grassroots. And that's why Aja's lit. So thank you for pulling up for the show. This is
Sorry, I was sick. I feel so.
It's so good. You gave out like this was a dope interview.
I wish I was like at my height of myself.
I think you still gave me a dope interview.
Okay.
For where you are.
I'm glad.
You could have been like sneezing and like, man, fuck this shit. You could have got up mid interview and walked out. Those things happen. Those things happen.
I would never do that.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate you for drinking the Marduce, and I'm hoping that mint tea we could heat that back up for you. Right. But this has been another episode of Lit. Follow us at Lit Platform. Follow me at Yadon. Shout out to the production studio Pink Pig Pro and my man Cyril Juice who plays the music under so nicely. We out. See you another time.